Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Bob.
How you doing?
Doing very well. Very
Good.
well indeed.
Pleasure to have you on the Wright Show.
It's a
You,
pleasure to be on. I'm feeling right at home here at Blogging Heads, so it's good to, come into the mothership every now
yeah,
and
I
then.
don't know if you had the same TV viewing habits as I did as a kid, or exactly how old you are, but it's kind of like when characters from Green Acres would show up on Petticoat Junction or something. I mean, you're the host of the Glenn Show on Blogging Heads TV, and here you are on the Wright Show.
Yeah, well, I was around when those TV shows were on, although I may not have seen as many episodes as you did, Robert.
Few people did, believe me, and the scars still show.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, if there's anyone, and there may be no one listening to this or watching it who's not already aware of your show and fully invested in it, if there's anyone who's not, they should subscribe to your show. They can subscribe to the podcast for your show. They can subscribe to get emailed whenever it posts. The Glenn Show has made a lot of waves. You say things other people aren't saying about contemporary America, and that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you about Donald Trump. Now, one more piece of inside baseball. Some of my shows, The Wright Show, go on Blogging Heads TV, and some go on its sister site, Meaning of Life TV. I'm not sure exactly how this conversation about Donald Trump is going to go. In other words, where this show is going to wind up. I'd like to kind of steer it in the Meaning of Life direction, which means not so much about the politics and the horse race politics, more about what all of this says about being a human being. So
Okay.
let me start out that way and ask you what. I mean, I assume that you, like many of us, were a little surprised by the Trump phenomenon. Leave aside what he represents politically, just this guy being the guy. I mean, a year ago, 2 years ago, most people I know were kind of considered him kind of a joke. Were you as surprised as many?
Yeah, I was surprised watching the Republican primary campaign unfold. I mean, I saw the performance, I saw the gaffes, I saw the name calling, I saw the rude references to body parts and the other hysterical and deeply disturbing things that transpired when there were 12, 15, 17 people standing on the Republican debate stage. And it would have never occurred to me as this thing was unfolding that the Donald could actually prevail. I mean, after all, some of these people, Jeb Bush for one, or John Kasich for another, are serious politicians. They've got substantial political accomplishments behind themselves. They're public administrators. They've been playing the game for decades. This guy is, with no disrespect intended, Carnival Barker isn't far off, is it? I mean, he's an entertainment fan. He's P.T. Barnum. He's this kind of gadfly. He doesn't have the background. You just don't think it's going to happen. So as the train wreck unfolded in slow motion, and he became the nominee of the Republican Party, I was very surprised to see it happen, but it did indeed take place.
Mm-hmm. And we should say you are somebody with I guess you could say, an eclectic, ideological history. Certainly, you've been at points identified as a conservative, and at other points less so. But you're not someone who's incapable of seeing things from a conservative or Republican point of view, I think.
Yeah, I'm not without sympathy for the Republican point of view on taxes and whatnot. I mean, even on the border, the concerns that Trump has given voice to are not entirely alien to my own sensibility. But I would have called myself a centrist Democrat if anybody had asked me to give a party affiliation.
Okay.
I haven't always been that way. Was a Reagan Republican back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are people who'll never forgive me. But in any case, think of myself as maybe even mildly right of center, but in any case, a Democrat, not a Republican.
Okay. So what do you think it says about human nature? And if you had to revise your views about human nature in light of Trump becoming the guy and all he seems to represent, attracting so much support?
I'm not sure I've got any real wisdom on this, Bob. I've always taken it as being more a statement about the distrust, dislike, alienation from the Washington establishment, first in the Republican Party and then more broadly, that Trump has been able to draw all of these people around himself, that they're giving, as it were, this is nothing at all original, a middle finger firmly in the face of those people, whether it's Wall Street bankers or it's Washington insiders, whether it's lobbyists or whether it's politically correct cultural barons who want to lecture the rest of the country about the year is 2016 and you're still acting as if it were 1986, whatever the issue might be, that political correctness, this kind of thing. I always thought what I was seeing with the Trump phenomenon was people using support for his candidacy as a way of expressing their voicelessness or feeling of powerlessness or whatever vis-a-vis convention, vis-a-vis the conventional established order of things. Mm-hmm. So what does that say about human nature? I'm not sure it says anything that would be new about human nature. A populist demagogue, America first, he says, you don't have a country if you don't have a border, he says. They're stealing our jobs. Our leaders are stupid. I mean, think about this language. How can, they're stupid. We're led by stupid people. You can ride that kind of vitriolic denunciation of people who've built their careers serving the public all the way to the doorstep of the White House. I mean, to me, that's a very powerful signal about people genuinely being alienated from, having no confidence or trust in these institutions and the people who are running them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess maybe one way to put the question, or maybe ask a new question, is, there are different parts of human nature. There are parts of human nature that people think of as dark and not so good, and there are parts that are said to be the better angels of our nature, and there are you can try to appeal to either one. I guess, is it your view, and I don't mean to be leading the witness here, and in general, I'm certainly not as disdainful of Trumpism as many people of my own ideological persuasion, and which is to say, progressive. But do I take it that you're saying that he appeals to the worst part of human nature by and large?
No, I don't mean to be saying that. I don't think alienation from anger at a sense of lack of trust or confidence in the major governing institutions of the country is a sign of some kind of damaged or problematic human nature. I could see how people might find their way around to that position. After all, is it not the case that we've been led into an endless series of wars in the Middle East that have cost us untold amounts of treasure, et cetera, et cetera? Is it not the case that we've been lied to or manipulated by certain institutions that we, 30 years ago would have just reflexively put our trust in, whether it be the person occupying the office of the presidency of the United States, or it be, leading news organs that we would have taken as, papers of record, but that have become much more explicitly partisan. I mean, is it not the case that an arrogant sort of elite in the culture, entertainment business, I take a Bill Maher as a kind of a prototypic representative of it, has been sneering for years down their noses at yokels who happen to live in Branson, Arkansas, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, or whatever it might be. Is it not the case that race card playing, quote, civil rights activists, close quote, who can't see past the end of their own dark noses, I'm sorry for how that sounds, but I actually mean this, people who interpret every event in American public life as an indication of persistent white supremacy, and who lord it over others by citing demographic trends that show that whites will soon be a minority, is not the case that they've been trumpeting this line for some time now? So that if you were a white person in the vicinity of about to becoming a minority, and you saw people crowing about your marginalization, that you might organize around your whiteness and try to defend yourself? I hope everybody understands, I'm not saying that that's the correct position for our country, or that it's a morally defensible position. I'm just saying it's a completely comprehensible position to me and one that doesn't bespeak any kind of, sort of tarnished soul that we have to twist ourselves into knots to try to understand. They're pissed off. They've been ignored. Nobody's been speaking to them. The jobs have left Eastern Kentucky or Southwestern Ohio or whatever it is. I read J.D. Vance, Hillbilly Elegy, and I get a sense of where some of these people are coming from. And, if 5 cops get shot down in Dallas by a crazed person who happens to be black and might have some Black Lives Matter material on his computer, and the major commentary from liberal organs, whether it be Salon or Huffington Post or the Black Lives Matter people themselves, is this didn't have anything to do with us. This didn't have anything. Not 5 people serving the country have been murdered. Oh my God, let us rally around their families. If we have to be reminded about black and white when we're standing over the graves of public service officers who've been murdered in the line of duty, then the fact that there could be a reaction against that, a fierce reaction to which a politician might play to his benefit, it comes as no surprise to me.
Okay, so it sounds like you have no trouble whatsoever understanding many of the, you might say, grievances of Trump supporters.
Yeah, grievances and hurt feeling that their voices are not heard or that they're not thought to be legitimate. And therefore, finding somebody who is their standard bearer, for whom the more fierce the attack coming from the usual suspects, the more legitimate he becomes as an emblem of the very grievances that they're nursing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just saying, I don't see it as a puzzle. Yeah. To figure out where these people, and indeed, I think the tendency that many of us have, present company accepted, of course, to pathologize Trump support, and then to wring our hands about what manner of country have we become that people can behave in this way, only feeds into it. It only feeds into those people saying, you see what they think of us? Even when we come out with sincere expressions of our political beliefs, they condemn us. They've got another story about why I'm a racist for having a point of view about whatever the issue might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't. I'm not among those who has a lot of trouble understanding, I think, what's going on. I mean, my sister is going to vote for Trump. I to some extent, I come from these people. To some extent, I mean, my family's complicated, but this isn't alien to me.
Okay.
And that's an oversimplification of my family, which I won't get into. But anyway, I have more than one close relative who I'm not at all sure is going to vote for Hillary, and I have at least one sibling who's definitely going to vote for Trump. So I kind of get all that, but one question is okay, so granted that, and I think a number of people would say, granted that, this guy. And so like a question is it the case that like he just happened to be the voice? And you can imagine a guy who looks and acts like Marco Rubio or like Trump's running mate, for that matter, smoother, a little more civil, diplomatic, but capable of getting fired up. You can imagine a guy like that carrying the mantle or any number of other people. Is it just kind of happenstance that we wound up with this guy, or is it the case that almost everything I personally find abhorrent about him, ranging all the way up to making fun of disabled people, is that, in the eyes of some of these people, is that a feature, not a bug? I shouldn't dwell on that in particular. I'd like to think that almost none of these people applaud that per se, but you know what I mean. Is there a lot about this guy that so many Americans just find repulsive that actually makes him well suited to embody the voice of people with this set of grievances?
Yeah, I think very good question. Again, I don't know that I have any particular insight. I'm thinking back to the campaign, the primary campaign season, and how he managed to outmaneuver people. I mean, he comes up with these labels, little Marco, low energy Jeb, and all of this kind of stuff, which might well have sunk somebody for the incivility of it. You know, I'm Mr. Bush or Governor Bush. I'm not low energy Jeb. How dare you speak to me that way? And yet it didn't do. The Megyn Kelly thing comes to mind. Of course, we could just tick off all of these, bizarre things that Trump said and things that he did. And they didn't sink him. And so this reputation for, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and my supporters would stick by me. I think it's very important to try to understand what that had been about. I don't think we've got enough distance yet. It's a kind of a historian or long form journalist deep dive kind of problem to try to get a handle on that. But I would speculate that some of it may have been that it appealed to some people's visceral orientations towards some kind of, I don't know what, manly, aggressive, kind of boisterous, whatever. He's supposed to have a lot of money. He's supposed to be this, this figure. I never watched The Apprentice, so I don't know what people are seeing there, but presumably people saw something worth watching there for themselves. But I think another part of it would be whenever he would do this, the, quote, usual suspects, close quote, would start crowing. They'd start saying, oh, my God, what has he done? Oh, my God, how horrible is it? The Washington Post, New York Times, the cable news, MSNBC, whatever. People would come on and they'd say, oh, he's terrible, he's whatever. And the viewer out there is confronted with, do I join this, condemnation? Or do I pull back? And they chose sides. And they chose against the gray lady. They chose against CBS News. Something like that.
Well, how much of it is about side choosing? I mean, you're an economist, not a psychologist, but the two disciplines are not entirely unrelated. And in fact, I think a psychologist recently won the Nobel Prize in economics, Danny Kahneman.
Indeed.
How much of it is about the dynamics of group affiliation? A lot of reason to think that people naturally align themselves with groups. You can call it tribalism metaphorically, but it's not always a tribe literally, of course. It can be along national lines, ethnic lines, ideological lines, sports team lines, and in Europe with these soccer games, the intensity can rival that of ethnic hostility, how much of what puzzles people on the left about support for Trump has to do with, identifying your team, and after that, the rest is history, right? It's like, this guy's the leader of my team, period. And we really care about this game.
Well, that is kind of what I think I was just saying a moment ago about why it is that some people didn't peel away when he would do the outrageous things that he did. Another thing I think, I'm not answering you directly about the team business. I'm affirming that I think that's a piece of it, a non-trivial piece of it. Another thing, though, I thought was that, so Trump would say, to hell with the NATO alliance. They got to pay their own way. To hell with them. Now, the case for America bearing more than its, if you will, fair share of the burden of maintaining global public order, because that's what's held the world together since the end of World War II. No, I can't justify it in terms of a kind of rational self-interest of the United States as a nation. It's the role we're playing, and we're proud to play it. Somebody says America first, to which a very good answer, I think, could be composed along with, no, not America first. I can understand Teddy Roosevelt saying that, but we're not going to say that in the 21st century, faced with nuclear proliferation, faced with pending climate change, faced with, the well-being of humanity is poorly served by America first. 5% more welfare for America could come at the price of 50% less welfare for 3 billion people. That's not a trade worth making. Somebody who says, you say we can't have a country if we don't have a border. I say that border down there, I grant you it can be porous from time to time, but you know what? There's a lot of flowing back and forth across that border. A lot of Americans depend upon the flowing back and forth, illegal and illegal, across that border. We're eating the vegetables that these people pick, and so forth and so on. There's a history here. Viewing our situation vis-a-vis our neighbors to the south over a period of 100 years, it's a very bad move for us to pull up the drawbridge right now. Yes, we have to have laws. They need to be enforced. Let's talk about what we're going to do about that. But let's kill the rhetoric about building a wall on that border, not because of some functional utilitarian calculation about how many immigrants are going to come, but because that's not really the way we want to present ourselves to the rest of the world, and so on. Okay? I never heard those arguments. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is, I never, the impulse to react to Trump in characterological terms, he's a bad person, mm-hmm. foregoes the opportunity to rebut and refute the substantive arguments that he's making. Nobody is bringing those jobs back. I'm talking about the ones that have gone to places where the wage rate is $3 an hour rather than $30 an hour. They're never coming back. Those jobs are not coming back. Let me say it another time. Those jobs are gone. Globalization is what it is. Okay? Now, we need a plan to adapt to the reality of the fact that those jobs are gone. But the idea that they got stolen by somebody and that they're going to be brought back is just a fallacy. Mm-hmm. I don't recall a vigorous engagement with the deeply problematic, substantive content of Trump's platform. Mm-hmm. Rather, I think people thought, and I think Hillary Rodham Clinton continues to think, and she may be proven right about this in the end, that the most effective way to deal with him was not to give credence to and enter down into the weeds of debating this or that point of substance, but instead to say, he's not the guy that we want with the nuclear codes. A lot is riding on that strategy working right now.
Yeah, and she also said, you know, he's a bigot and he's a misogynist and so on. And I think part of it is she's mindful of what her constituency in fact is. If she can get out the black vote and get out the Latino vote and get women, you know, fired up, she's in pretty good shape. And I think she's more or less seeding the non-college educated, white, especially white male vote. So I think I got to think the politics have shaped her reaction, but I think you're right that it's her line has been basically, isn't this a bad man? Of course, in fairness, that's his line about all of his political rivals. Sure. Isn't this a horrible or stupid or ugly person? That, you know. I
agree, and she had better be right about this because a lot is riding on it. But let me just give you personal testimony. So one of the things that Trump has said is the black communities, this is a subject I care about. I write about it, been writing about it for 40 years. So what do we do about the inner cities, the disadvantage, racism, racial subordination, African Americans, so forth and so on. So the schools don't work, so the streets are not safe, and so there's not enough jobs. Okay, so Trump stands up and says, I'll fix it. Okay, trust me, what do you have to lose? Now, when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, we're getting ready to have a debate about the inner cities. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to tell me why charter schools or other kinds of extra institutional interventions that would try to reform the schools for the kids who don't have the money and can't move to the suburbs is a bad idea. They're going to explain that to me. Somebody's going to tell me why so many bodies are dropping dead on the streets of Chicago and how it is that getting behind the cops is not the answer to that problem, but there are other effective answers that we're prepared to mount major efforts in investing in. Somebody's going to tell me about how these kids who can't find jobs when they leave high school are going to get government jobs of last resort or are going to get programs that are going to upgrade their skills, or they're going to get a special 2-year community college thing that's going to allow them. I can't wait to hear that debate. But I never heard the debate. Instead, what I heard was, don't believe him, he's a bad man. I heard, various versions of what Michelle Obama said the other day, which was, he dared to call my community hell. Instead of telling me, no, he's not the guy to fix it, but we're going to fix it. Mm-hmm. They answer me with, get in line, get on the team. Don't you realize this is an extinction level event threat to American democracy? He must be stopped because of who he is. And I have to tell you that I, Glenn Loury, with a PhD and, being a centrist Democrat, felt a little bit not well respected by that response to Mr. Trump, whom I think deserved to be refuted. I think he can be refuted. Mm-hmm. I'm not voting for Trump. I don't want to be misunderstood here. But I'm saying, if even I, on that issue, could feel that, the system is rigged, no, that's putting it too strongly, but feel that partisan forces are conspiring to distort this debate so that we don't have to get answers to questions that are important to us. Instead, they're leading me by the nose to do what it is that they're telling me is the right thing to do. If I felt that, I can imagine that many people who would be less positively disposed toward Hillary Rodham Clinton, whom, after all, I supported in 2008, would feel the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's true that these are the least substantive presidential debates in the history of presidential debates. And the most ad hominem. And on Hillary's version of the ad hominism, in other words, the claim that in addition to being, unfit to hold the nuclear codes, he's misogynistic and bigoted. I'm wondering what your view on that is, because, he has said a couple of things that I think, it doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to consider playing to bigotry. Like when he says, we're going to ban all Muslims, as he put it at one point. When he says, these Mexicans coming over, they're rapists. And then he adds, some of them, I assume, are good people. But for the most part, I would say it's been more about what are called dog whistles. Things that are a little less overt than that. I mean, the allegations of his bigotry. Even the thing he said about the inner cities are a mess, that was taken as or cast by some as an insult to African Americans. Yeah. So I'm wondering, and then there are these things he retweets. He retweets this thing with a Star of David. I think it's pretty implausible that whoever created that graphic wasn't aware that was a Star of David. I suppose it's conceivable he could retweet it without thinking that. I don't know. But the question is, how much of it do you, well, in a way, we get back to Hillary's basket of deplorables remark. I mean, how many of these people do you think are, in one of these senses, deplorable? And how much is, how big a part of Trump's actual strategy and the actual mobilization of support he's enjoyed do you think has to do with things like bigotry and misogyny?
Yeah, I think a lot, though I am loath to leave it at simply bigotry and misogyny. Okay, so suppose I'm one of these good old boys who resents affirmative action. My kid didn't get into Princeton or Brown or whatever it was, and another kid in the high school with less distinguished record got in, and that kid was black. And I voiced that at a PTA meeting or, whatever. And the reaction to me is, you're a racist and you're a bigot. Now, I feel justifiably wronged, and I've been called a bigot by somebody, and that happens a lot. It happens every day. Suppose I side with the cops and not the demonstrators when people are throwing projectiles down from a bridge in Minneapolis, St. Paul, after Philando Castile gets shot dead by a police officer in a suburban town. And the cops, and there's a demonstration, and the interstate is blocked, and they're trying to clear it, and people are throwing bottles and bricks down on them. And I side with the cops. Suppose I think law and order is a serious matter. Suppose I was disappointed when President Obama basically sends Al Sharpton around the country as an ambassador of the administration on behalf of racial justice, and I think of Al Sharpton as a charlatan and an ambulance chaser, and I'm offended by that, and I voice that, and I get told to shut up. I'm a bigot. I'm a racist. I'm a racist for and I could go on. Now along comes a guy who says, to hell with political correctness, I take your side on all of those issues. I think affirmative action is problematic. I think Black Lives Matter have their heads up their butts. I'm with the cops, and so on and so forth. I think Obama's done a poor job. Suppose I'm somebody who really wasn't entirely comfortable with an African American being elected president. I know that very idea is repulsive to most of our listeners out there. But believe me, there are people in this world who are not comfortable with a Catholic becoming president, who are not going to be comfortable with a Jew becoming president. They'll get used to it. Who are not comfortable with a black becoming president, they'll get used to it. Is that anti-Catholicism? Yes. Is that anti-Semitism? Yes. And is that racism? Yes. Okay. They should be comfortable with it. But we're not all on the same page here today, Bob. People are in different positions. And I'm one of those persons, suppose I am, who wasn't entirely comfortable. Doesn't mean I couldn't be persuaded, but it just meant I had a little bit of a lump in my chest. I had a little bit of anxiety and concern about that. Now, there's a number of ways you can try to bring me in. Talk to me. Get me to be comfortable with that. Get me to be a part of the team. One of them is not wagging your finger in my face and calling me names and lecturing me and saying that I'm a Yahoo. Okay? So yes, Trump has appealed to racism. I don't know that saying we have criminal aliens coming across the border who are preying on our people and I'm going to stop them is a racist statement. I grant you that the particular verbiage that he used certainly could have been deeply offensive to people who were of Mexican background, and he well might have said it more artfully and differently. But I would put a lot more weight on the dog whistle part of it. That is, on the implicit signaling to people in the electorate whom Hillary Clinton might be ready to call deplorable, but whom I would be a little bit slower to call them simply retrograde, simply reprobate, simply dismissible as people who simply didn't get the memo that we're in the 21st century. I think the country is complicated. I think not everybody's okay with this bathroom stuff. People are having a lot of problems, some people, with the bathroom stuff. That is, the transgender, you go here, you go there. It's all happening so very quickly in our time. Not everybody's on the same page at the same time. So, yeah, he's dog whistling at them when he says, I'm standing with the cops. He's basically saying, I'm against those black people who were protesting the cops and so on. Yeah, sure, he's doing it. Nothing new with that in politics. We dog whistle on the other side, too, in our various ways about the issues that we think will motivate our base. But I also think there's some responsibility that the cultural elites carry for being less than sympathetic. I mean, I listen to Bill Maher. I don't mean to single him out. He's only one of many, but he's prominent. I listen to the way that he talks about people with whom he has political disagreements, who are religious people, for example. I find it to be mildly offensive, okay? I mean, people can be religious. They're not idiots because they're religious. I mean, Maher has, and Dawkins and others have their points, about the, quote, irrationality, close quote, of religious belief. But, we're thousands of years in the making, this civilization that we have. And I just think a little bit of forbearance, a little bit of modesty, a little bit of humility, a little bit of kindness, generosity toward the other people and so forth and so on would go a very, very long way. So I'm back to my point that, yeah, in a way, we elites here on the Northeast corridor are reaping a bit of what we've sown with this embrace of Trump, who is indeed using racist and misogynistic symbolism to communicate with some of his supporters.
And what do you think the prospects are for things getting better? Of course, as we tape this, we don't know who will win, and right now it looks like actually either one of them could win at this particular moment, given recent events. Right. What do you think? I personally have trouble seeing, things looking very good after this either way.
I'm very worried, Bob. I'm not an expert. I say now for the 88th time. But I'm just my common sense, my kind of intuition. I've got a very, very bad feeling about it. I mean, if Trump wins the election, heaven forbid, my God, there's going to be a lot of resistance.
Well, even I try imagining that. I just imagine myself doing extreme things. I mean, people joke about going to Canada and
exactly.
or civil disobedience or something, but I don't know how I would handle that.
Well, getting 500,000 people on the streets of New York City is probably not going to be difficult to do, to express the objection to a fascist, a Nazi. I mean, what did I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the guy who used to be editor at the New Republic, Andrew Sullivan say? He says it's an extinction level event for American democracy, which I thought was put a bit of a fine point on it. Extinction, forget about it. Forget about 240 years of constitutional government. We're going down the tubes. And so, I mean, a couple of things occurred to me. One is, if I thought my country were indeed by a mob of a plurality of American voters being pushed over the cliff, I would feel justified in doing just about anything to prevent that from happening.
If your view were that extreme, and
if I were that extreme, please, yes, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not about to take up arms, but I know that there are
Yeah.
people who would take up arms.
Yeah.
They feel that way about it.
Because believe me, if Chris Christie is Attorney General next year, you're not going to want any ambiguity about that being on videotape. Believe me.
You're quite right about that. I can see the present day version of the McCarthy hearings unfolding right now.
Oh, man.
Ivy League professors are being called up to testify before Congress because of their seditious remarks. And no, I did not say that. What you think you might have heard me say, that's not what I intended. I'm just saying people are going to be pissed off.
I personally have no recollection of any association with Glenn Loury whatsoever, Your Honor.
There you are. And on the other side, too, we've heard a lot of talk about the violence of the Trump people. I don't know if you've bothered to watch any of these rallies. I have.
Yeah.
I mean, I've logged on to YouTube and I've sat for an hour and I've marveled at the rabid character of these massive crowds.
Yeah.
That this guy is pulling 10, 15,000 with several thousand standing on line outside for hours to get in to see him. They are fired up and ready to go, as President Obama once said. They're fired up and they're ready to go. That guy, if he loses this election or when he loses, whatever's going to happen, has the future of the country on his shoulders to a certain extent. I mean, he has a lot of responsibility, even in defeat. We have no reason to expect that he would exercise that responsibility in a way that's fostered.
Magnanimous loser is not a term that comes to mind.
No, it is indeed not.
I think, regardless of who wins, I think that almost the only thing that could start turning things around anytime soon would be, and I say this, by the way, with full understanding that one thing that's been revealed lately is that elites, as sociologists call a certain category of people, elites do not have as much power as we thought they had in the modern technological or whatever environment. I understand that. At the same time, I think if anything could help to turn things around, it would be if there were a truly bipartisan, trans-ideological, networked effort by elites who genuinely were more concerned about just the overall tenor of discourse and the degree of bitterness in the country than they are about getting their own ideological agenda, advanced next month or next year. If there were a large number of those elites and they could get together and talk about this, maybe you could start seeing some progress, because they do have real power. But nothing I've seen on either side in this election really suggests to me that you could see anything like that. Yeah, I don't want to be too pessimistic. There are a lot of very concerned people, but certainly if you look at the political class, the people who go on CNN, many of them elected officials, if you look at the political class, it seems to be very unlikely that you're going to get them to sign on to just an anti-tribalism agenda, as opposed to aligning fundamentally with one tribe or the other.
I'd like what you're saying, Bob. I agree with you to be pessimistic about it, but I'd like to think that even now, before the election, privately, some of these bigwigs, of the big financiers and the former senior political operatives and leaders in the media and so forth, who are graybeards or gray-haired ladies, whatever they are, would be now talking about that. I mean, they're partisans. They've endorsed. They're on one side or the other. They're mostly on Hillary Rodham Clinton's side, but would even now be thinking about surely this would have to be a part of any transition planning in a Clinton operation where you're going to get elected. How are you going to govern? What are you going to do the first week, not of your presidency, of your post-election period? How are we going to come? How are we going to manage? I'd like to think that people are talking about and thinking about initiatives that would be launched immediately after the results of the election were known to try to tamp things down and to bring us together, religious leaders and others from across the spectrum. I'd like to think that was going on. It certainly feels to me to be very much necessary. Mm-hmm. And not to wait until the election is over, because, time will be of the essence.
Okay, well, let's let this be the moment this begins, Glenn. We'll talk after this taping and start the network that will save the world,
Okay.
or at least the nation. I know you've got to go soon, so I'll let you go. But again, I want to encourage people to watch your show, The Glenn Show on Blogging Heads, subscribe to your show, and for that matter, check out your work as an economist at Brown University if they feel up to that.
Thanks a lot, Bob. I can be found easily by searching Brown University Glenn Loury. I have a webpage there.
And you have a Twitter handle, right? You're on Twitter.
I do. It's Glenn.Loury1.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much, Glenn.
Okay.
All right.